Hey, so you've just now taken the IAPCC student version cultural competency test, and now I want to talk a little bit about what your responses mean. This is a survey that there's no right and wrong responses, but it's important to kind of gauge how you answered and what that means as far as levels of cultural competence. So let's take a look at some of this information here. So first thing that I want to talk about is just to define terms. There are really 5 different terms, and I've got them up on the screen for you here to look at: cultural desire, awareness, knowledge, skill, and encounters. And when we talk about an overall level of cultural competence, we want to break it up into which of these 5 categories is it? Because somebody could be really strong in cultural awareness, but lack the skill in order to conduct culturally based assessments and understand how to interact in those type of capacities. So it's really important that when we are first now defining in this first week or two of this course and saying, okay, how culturally competent am I, and are there areas that I might be deficient in, this is where we're looking at. So take a minute. I'm not going to read each one of these for you. So if you want to pause this video and just kind of read each of these. For the rest of the video, what we're going to do is we're going to break down each one of these 5 areas and talk about which questions on your survey were affiliated with those. So also make sure that you have your completed survey with you so that you can reference that and kind of gauge where you were at. All right, so this again is just the same idea with cultural desire, awareness, knowledge, skill, and encounters, but it talks about which is the type of question that relates to each of these. Desire, do I really want to become culturally competent? Awareness, do I know what my biases or prejudices even are towards other cultural groups, as well as racism or other isms, and we'll talk about what these isms mean in healthcare. So am I even aware that I have these types of things? Knowledge, am I knowledgeable about worldviews of different culture, ethnic groups, as well as knowledge about the field of bioculture? So do I even understand and I'm knowledgeable about all these views? Skill is just, do I have the skill of conducting a cultural assessment in a very sensitive manner? And encounters, do I actively seek out face-to-face or other types of interactions with individuals who are different from myself? So these are the types of questions that will allow us to assess cultural competency in healthcare delivery. And now we will start breaking down each of the questions affiliated with the survey and see, okay, which one of these does that line up with? So let's start with desire and pull out your survey and look at questions 2, 5, 16, and 20. These all relate to cultural desire. Do I really want to become culturally competent? So if you marked strongly agree or agree, that means you shift towards having that desire to become culturally competent. If you are marking that you strongly disagree, obviously that's the other side of it. So it would be your cultural competence desire that would be lacking if you scored low on those 4 questions. So this is kind of the baseline. What mindset are you going into when you're talking about cultural competence? It's genuine, it's authentic, there's no hidden agendas. It's, do you want to become competent or do you not want to become competent? That doesn't have anything to do with how knowledgeable you are about certain cultures or certain races, ethnic groups. It doesn't matter what skill level you have in actually interacting with different types of people. It's just, do you care about this enough to want to become competent? These are some examples and concepts that contribute to desire, especially in a healthcare setting. Caring and love, Often this is one of the reasons we get into healthcare in the first place is we want to help people, we care for people, and we love people. And love can have a lot of different meanings. So I'm not talking about the more intimate love that you might have with a partner, but love for another human being, recognizing the differences, building similarities, wanting to assist in someone else's life is the type of love that we're talking about within a healthcare setting. So also sacrifice. We're not going to be working with people who always have the same viewpoint as us. So people have prejudices and biases in this type of setting. So how do we interact with people, and do I really want to interact with somebody that's very different from me? So that's kind of, I mixed two of the things. How do we would be the skill, but cultural desire, do I really want to interact with those that have very different views than my own? So all relates to cultural competence. Social justice is just breaking down these systems. Do I really want to break down these systems? Those are the types of questions that we ask for this. And it's important to realize to have a strong desire to become culturally competent is not thinking of yourself less, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Good example that I can give personally for this is my husband, Savan, is Indian, and his parents, Lena and Dixit are their names. They came over from India when they had just gotten married. They were like in their early 20s. And so obviously they have strong cultural ties to India. Their native language is Gujarati and not English. So they practice Hinduism. They have very, very strong cultural ties. And when Savan and I first started dating, and then as we were planning the wedding, it was important. I'm not Indian, and we often joked I'm about the whitest person that you could see. I've got a fair skin and blonde hair next to Savan, who darker skin and dark hair, obviously looks Indian. So and I'm proud of who I am and my upbringing and the culture that I have. But I was also interested in my future husband's family and the way that he was brought up and their own culture. So it wasn't that I thought my own culture was lacking and I was seeking something that to fulfill something I didn't have in my life, but I was thinking about my own culture less when I explored Savan's culture and his family's culture. Again, I didn't want to get lost in this. I didn't want to lose who I am and all the years that have shaped me into who I am. But I also I had a desire, or cultural competence here, or cultural desire, to learn about the person I was with and what background has shaped who they are. So very, very different there. And it was important as we move forward in our marriage now that, I still have my own identity. And that's really important. I'm not thinking less of myself, that I'm just going to kind of bleed into something totally different. But I also want to say, okay, well, who I am and who I'm evolving into is going to still hold true to the values that I have and still hold true to who I am, not thinking less. But I want to put kind of the relationship at the forefront. And in some situations when it wouldn't be exactly what I would choose on my own, think about it as, well, we're a pair now. So now I'm choosing for a pair. And therefore, this is what I want to do. So hopefully that example kind of helps to show what this is. The next one is awareness. Am I even aware of my biases, prejudices towards other cultural groups, as well as racism and other isms? These are questions 1, 3, and 15 on your survey. This, by far, is the most serious barrier to cultural competent care. You could have a strong desire, strong knowledge, strong skill level, and not have any clue that you're being prejudiced towards another cultural group. One of the biggest areas that I've personally seen this in is ageism. We have these other isms in healthcare. So it isn't just racism, but ageism and sexism both are types of isms that can be identified in healthcare. And I've seen this where actually working with a couple students a few years ago, they were talking among themselves in kind of the reception area, and myself and the administrative assistant were talking, who is a female in her probably early to mid 40s, and then I'm just a little younger than that. And the students were saying something, and we overheard them. And we said, "What are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "Oh gosh, we're talking about like how ancient these people's mindsets are." And they gave an example of some encounter that they had out in the real world. And we said, "What do you mean they're ancient?" And the one student said, "Well, they're basically ancient anyway. They're like 50 years old." And we're thinking, "Oh my gosh, to this group of people, 50 was basically an age cutoff that at 50 or older, their knowledge is basically worthless because they're so ancient that they couldn't provide value." So really interesting example of an ageism. And obviously, the students had no idea that they were being prejudiced towards a certain group. They had no idea, and was not malicious whatsoever, but it still was a lack of awareness of the way that they were thinking. There is this video here, and I'll put a link to the YouTube video on Blackboard, so if you want to watch it, it's about 5 minutes long. And it talks about, it's called Mind the Gap, talks about ageism, sexism, different types of isms, and gives an example of how are we aware of it. So interesting video there, but take a look at your questions 1, 3, and 15. And again, look, how aware are you for cultural competency? The third one is knowledge. Am I knowledgeable about the worldviews of different cultural and ethnic groups, as well as am I knowledgeable at the field of biocultural ecology? And there are 5 questions, so mark questions 4, 6, 8, 9, and 12. All examples of your own knowledge of the different diversity found within each culture, and this kind of combines your own life experiences and then the process of acculturation to other cultures. So how well have you been exposed to other cultures, either by traveling to different places, if you've traveled a lot, or reading about things, interacting in different groups where you may have a circle of friends or work group, or possibly just be involved in different activities where you have been exposed to different cultures. Some of these, I'm just putting all these up on the screen. I've got a couple more, are examples of how you might come to know the truth about a different group, how you might explore and gain knowledge in these types of areas. One of the best ways to increase knowledge is just to obtain it directly from your clients, your patients, your athletes, your work colleagues, individuals that you're working with. But in conjunction to that, it's utilizing your own experiences and kind of living with and interacting with the different cultures. So it's both first and secondhand knowledge with that. Skill is, do I have the skill of conducting a cultural assessment in a sensitive manner? Questions 7, 17, and 18. So 3 of these. There are a lot of options out there for cultural assessments. This is an important thing. Every single person that you're going to interact with in your future healthcare area, whether you're planning on being in a clinical role or a non-clinical role, every patient needs a cultural assessment. Some you can do very formally, some informally. You don't want to just think of the people that look like they need a cultural assessment to gear all your stuff towards that. And in fact, this would be one of those biases that people tend to have. So cultural assessments, there's a bunch out there, and I've put a link to a PDF that I can share with you all. There are a lot of different areas that people could be working in that have unique cultural assessments that fit those types of areas, which is really great. And the data that you're going to obtain from doing a cultural assessment, and again, sometimes this could mean something as formal as what you guys just took of assessing cultural competency with questions and pen and paper, and they circle their responses just like you did. So some settings that you might be in clinical practice in the future could lend itself really nicely to that type of cultural assessment. It could make good sense that that's the way that you're going to conduct these in a sensitive manner. Sometimes that's totally inappropriate to hand somebody a piece of paper and a pen or a survey and a pen and say, hey, can you fill this out before we interact? I mean, so that's not a very sensitive manner to gather that information if you really have that desire to learn about how to interact best with this person. So in those cases, sometimes it's about having a conversation face-to-face and being able to integrate some of those questions in the cultural competency assessment and be able to integrate that in the conversation and learn, gain knowledge in that particular way. So important in fine-tuning that and knowing that there's more than one way to do this. There are some more subtle cultural assessment strategies. I think when you guys took this 20-question assessment, it was oh so very obvious that we were getting at how culturally competent are you. There are several others that they're a little bit more sneaky that get there, but they very much are not as obvious there. So these are some examples there. Plenty more out there as well. You need to be careful with some of these cultural assessments, though, because some have been validated and are reliable. You should know what those mean from your research background. But some are good tests that have been documented, and others are just somebody who wrote a few questions down and then with the age of the internet now, was just able to publish those and say, here's my cultural assessment, and may not be as valid as others out there. So be careful when you Google search for these. The last one is encounters. Do I seek out face-to-face and other types of interactions with individuals who are different from myself? There's 5 questions affiliated on your survey with these, 10, 11, 13, 14, and 19. And, with this is saying, okay, there's going to be a unique perspective for every patient that's going to bring to the clinical encounter. And your goal as a healthcare provider in the future or as a health educator or someone that works in public health, whatever your area of health science that you might be going into, your goal would be to make each cultural encounter a sacred encounter. So making it to address both the physical and cultural needs of both people, yourself and your patient. But again, it's not losing yourself or your patient. It's just saying, hey, I'm going to make this a sensitive and open environment where we both can thrive. So there's uniqueness of encounters when we talk about healthcare in the U.S. as compared to other areas of the world. And I think, sometimes we just think about, okay, it's once we get face to face with whoever we're going to interact with in the future, we're going to just make it really comfortable for them. And that'll be cultural competence. And we forget there could be things that have happened before they even get to see us that already made it unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Examples here. So in the United States, we healthcare professionals need to be credentialed. So there needs to be a long process, and you all will learn that for those of you going on to clinical things, graduate school, doctoral programs, so any kind of post undergraduate work that is in a structured, usually master's or doctoral program, and then going through licensure processes, national exams, all of that kind of stuff. Where this is not the same for healthcare professionals in all other countries. Sometimes they don't need to be credentialed in the same way. Also, in the United States, most places, not all, I can think examples like the athletic training room at North Central College here, you typically don't need an appointment to be seen in the athletic training room. But think about your own doctor. If you've ever gone to a physical or occupational therapist, you would have an appointment time. Here's when you are going to see your practitioner. And that is also something that is unique to the United States. This is less common in other countries to actually have appointment times versus just walk in, you know they're going to be there around this certain time. So those are a couple different examples of how before you even get face-to-face with individuals, the encounter could already be a little bit different than they're used to. So are you seeking out interactions and are you seeking out knowledge of the whole part of that interaction and how it could be unique from something else that they're used to? We're going to talk in class about different ways to manage conflict. So if we do get into interactions where somebody vastly thinks differently than us, or the encounter is a lot different and more uncomfortable than what we're used to, there are ways that we can effectively manage that. And these are some of just the bulleted points that are good starting points for that. So I hope that this was helpful in breaking down that survey. The next step for you to do is write out a reflection. And again, this stays just between you and I. But write out a reflection as to the way in which you scored and try to break it down into each of these 5 areas that I just spoke about. Again, cultural desire, awareness, knowledge, skill, and encounters. And talk about each one as related to your survey response. And go ahead and submit that on Blackboard. There's a link for you to submit when you're ready and some more information about the assignment there. Looking forward to hearing your takeaway from this survey and some of the terms that you just learned. See you in class.